Welcome to the Vault, where Central Illinois' best-kept stories are held.
We'd like to welcome Micah Bartlett to the podcast, a former CEO of Town & Country Bank. Welcome to the podcast, Micah.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Nick. I'm excited to be here. I'm honored that you asked me. I have to tell you, I'm also a little bit anxious, nervous about this because we all work together, which means you know all the bad stuff about me too, and I have absolutely no leverage over you, which means you can totally use that against me, or you could roast me, so I'm feeling a little vulnerable here, but I'm sure we are.
It's not a revenge podcast.
Yeah, okay, good,
right.
good.
And we spend most of the time roasting each other, so
okay,
you just
good.
laugh at us.
Just kind of, just light roasting for me, okay?
Yeah. We'll keep it light for sure. Yeah, for sure. So, what have you been up to?
Well, I just got back to town. Actually, we've been traveling a little bit. My wife and I. We, as you guys know, I retired as of February 8th of 2023.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yep. Following Town & Country Bank's merger with Heartland Bank, and so we actually have a motor coach that we like to travel in, and we have a place in Florida where we kind of leave it for the winter, and this year we took an extended time frame to come back to Illinois. So we've been on the road for 30 days and just got back last week. But it's good to be home in Springfield too.
What's the coolest thing you saw in those 30 days?
Coolest
place you went?
Well, actually, probably the highlight was we stopped at a place just outside of Asheville, North Carolina, and went to the Biltmore. Right. And that had kind of been on my bucket list, but I didn't know if I wanted to take a special trip just to see it. But since we were in the area, it was cool. That is such a cool place that everybody should see, I think. And it's still the largest residential home that was ever built. Built in the late 1800s from the original Vanderbilt's grandson. And so now I'm all obsessed about the Vanderbilt story. And so we've ended up watching the series, The Men Who Built America.
Yeah,
and we've got and so it just tying all that together. But even just seeing the lands and the building was pretty cool. But we had a lot of cool experiences. Okay. Riding bikes on the beach at Hilton Head. I've never done that before, so it was a pretty cool trip.
Yeah, I was just there a few months ago. That's a great spot. What kind of square footage are we talking about in the Biltmore? How big?
175,000.
Holy cow!
This is again, Cornelius is Vanderbilt's grandson. When he first built it, it was going to be when he first planned it, it's going to be like a 6,500 square foot property. And the architect said, "No, you've got this wonderful piece of land here. You've had many, many, many acres. Like it started with over 100,000 acres." And he says, "You need a house for the grandeur of the property, right?"
Yeah, there you go.
It was cool.
That's awesome.
Anything you've learned about yourself that you didn't know since you've been retired? Have you got some more time?
Oh, I think so. A lot. There's certainly more time to reflect and kind of make sense of it all. I had 33 straight years in community banking, not even one single workday in there that was uninterrupted in that 33 years. So, it's awesome, but on the other hand, it's weird.
Yeah.
It's weird. I'm 49 years old, so I'm kind of a young retiree. I'm not really done yet, but I am retired.
Yeah.
And so, you go through those phases of trying to make sense of all that, and what do you do with your life? And mostly I just feel blessed and fortunate, but you're also reflecting on what's it all mean and what's next. So that's been fun and rewarding to go through that, quite frankly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I think you have a pretty cool past, how you got into banking and stuff. So why don't you tell us where you're from, how you got into banking? Just start from the beginning. And
all right, but you guys know how I can talk, so
yeah,
you may have to break me up. No, I grew up. I was actually born in another state, but I grew up in between Girard and Carnerville, which is about a half hour south of here. And was a farm kid. And actually, for a year and a half, we lived up in northern Illinois. My mother met my stepfather, and so my first paying gig was mowing yards when I was in the first and second grade, and I had a self-propelled mower, and I would just go out. We lived in a single wide trailer in a mobile home park. And I would just go around and mow people's yards and get whatever they were willing to pay me. And I remember I was the youngest of four kids. I'd come back, and the rest of my siblings are watching cartoons on Saturday morning. I'm like, I just got another 90 cents for mowing somebody's yard, And so it's kind of funny in a weird way, even at that early of an age. Like I was always kind of finance oriented, money oriented. Like I just was intrigued by it, right? And the funny thing is, I saved that money. And I never spent it. I didn't want to buy anything with it. I just liked saving and accumulating the money. So I'm like, I guess I was destined to, be a guy of finance, right? But anyway, that was kind of funny. My first paying job was actually working for my stepfather, who was a rural township road commissioner. Okay. And so I literally was a ditch digger, right? When we hear that expression, but other things too. But so I started that. I think I was probably too young, actually, maybe 15. But I was making $6 an hour working on the roads. And then I have this opportunity to come work at the local bank. It was the State Bank of Girard at the time. That's now part of the First National Bank of Raymond. And my business teacher in high school, the bank had reached out to her to look for some recommendations just for some high school students as like summer tellers. Nice. And she recommended me. And so I started because of that. I was kind of thinking, I'm 16 now, I should start looking for a job, and that's kind of where I started. And, the rest is history, as they say. But the funny part was, so I take the job, I don't even know what it pays, and I'm like, I don't know, it's a bank, that sounds pretty good, right?
It's got to pay good, right?
Yeah, so I think my starting wage was like $3.85 an hour. Well, I was making $6 an hour working on the roads, and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm like, now I have to wear a tie, and I'm coming into the bank, and I'm only making $3.85 an hour. Mm-hmm. And I think seriously, it took maybe like 3 years before I got back up to the $6 an hour that I was making on the road, but it worked out okay.
Yeah.
So that was the early start. But from there, then I worked. I worked at State Bank of Girard and First National Bank of Raymond all throughout finishing high school and finishing college. Then I studied accounting, and so I became then a CPA, passed the CPA exam. And ended up kind of being the kind of de facto CFO at that bank, although we didn't use that title. And after I finished that and had the CPA designation, I thought maybe it's time to kind of spread my wings a little bit. So there was actually a correspondent banker named Larry Tucker, who a lot of bankers in this area know, and we had done some business with him, and so I reached out to him, said, I'm thinking maybe I need to spread my wings a little bit. And so he actually introduced me to a guy named Dewey Yeager, who was the president and CEO of the Central National Bank of Mattoon. So Dewey ends up hiring me there as his CFO. And Dewey ended up being a lifelong mentor and lifelong friend of mine, and actually is also the reason I'm at Town and Country, kind of all these years later. Sadly, he just passed away about 6 months ago, and so that was sad, but we also, honored a great person, and the family asked me to make some comments at his funeral, which I was honored to do. And so he was a very pivotal person in my career, and lots of great bosses, lots of great mentors, but he really taught me a lot and certainly helped me, along the way. I mean, it does sometimes take recommendations and introductions and things like that, and that was certainly true in my case.
So why do you think that worked, that mentorship with you and Dewey and any other mentor? What was it that...
Well, in his case, it's mostly because he wasn't afraid to tell me the truth, and so whether I wanted to hear it or not, right. he was that kind of a guy. And these were even some of the comments, I think I made in the eulogy, that, he was tough. He was not an easy boss, but he was utterly and completely fair. And you always knew where he stood, and he was honest. There was no unauthenticity there, and so I learned by watching him things to do, maybe a few things not to do, but you always got honest feedback, and that that was great, and so he ended up. We only worked together for 1 year in Mattoon. The owners of that bank ended up deciding to sell. And so Dewey moved back to DeKalb, Illinois, where he had worked previously. He actually was originally from Springfield. He was at one time like the senior commercial lender for the original Marine Bank of Springfield here, and worked in that bank for many years. But he went back to DeKalb and then asked me to come with him. So I had an opportunity to either stay with the company that bought our bank or to move with him up to DeKalb, and obviously I decided to do that. And so I spent a few years working with him then, and that was actually a kind of a, probably at that time at least, the most maybe sophisticated organization I had worked for. They were SEC registrant public companies, so I ended up doing a lot of finance work. I kind of became the de facto CFO there. and had a really good experience up there. So yeah, it's been great. And then just to finish the resume, so to speak. I had an opportunity to go to Stillman Bank in Rockford, where I was the CFO, and so then I was there for 6 years before having the opportunity to come to Town and Country, which was presented through Dewey. So I'm skipping a lot of detail there, but sure. Dewey ended up retiring, came on the board at Town and Country. Town and Country was in need for a new president, and so Dewey recommended me. And the rest is history again, I guess.
And that was your entrance into Springfield too, right?
That was my entrance into Springfield, yeah. So even though I grew up in this area, and Springfield was the big town when you live in Girard, I had not worked in Springfield before. So so that was 16 years ago, 2007, that I had the opportunity to come here. And as you guys know, it's been fantastic. And Town and Country is we all have a special place in our heart for it, but I kind of feel like it's my baby a little bit, along with the rest of ours, and I'm just very proud of what we accomplished there. Obviously, the growth and the success that the bank had, but maybe more importantly, the people and the culture. And as we weren't perfect. No organization is, but I'm just extremely proud of what we did there. So.
Yeah. So when you came on to Town and Country, I think a pretty significant piece is your age at that time. So how old were you, and how did that affect you coming in? Like, what was the dynamic?
Right, yeah. No, it's interesting. And I think probably, I don't think about it as much. I mean, 49's not young, not old. I'm just an old middle-aged guy, right? But age was kind of a theme in my career a little bit, because I started young, and I just kept at it, and so I'll back up a little bit. So Dewey, who I mentioned, hired me in Mattoon. That was in 1996, I think. So he hired me as his CFO. The title was cashier at the time. Cashier was what the title the bank used as the kind of the head operations and finance person. And so he hires me, and at the time I was 22. And he hired me to be his CFO. Well, on my resume, I didn't spell out my age. I just said, well, at that time I had 6 years of bank experience. I was, I graduated college, had a bachelor's degree in accounting, was a CPA. He just, I think he assumed something a little different, and so he hires me. And afterwards, of course, we ended up being great friends. He tells a story that a few weeks later he finally realized like how old I was. And he went home one day and he was talking to his wife, and he's like, Kathy, you're not going to believe what I did. Like, I hired a 22-year-old to be our CFO. And he mostly felt bad, like, he's not going to be able to do this job. And this kid has moved to town. I mean, he's uprooted his life. This is terrible. I mean, I can't believe I did this. How did I not know he was 22 years old? I thought he was young. I thought maybe 26, something like that. Right. Obviously, that all kind of worked out. So that was kind of the first interesting age chapter. But at the time, I've been working 6 years. I've done a lot of stuff in banking. I thought I know what I'm doing, and so I didn't think 22 was young. In retrospect, I look at it today, I'm like, that was pretty young. So then fast forward to Town and Country. So I was interviewed here, and they hired me to run the bank when I was 33. So again, of course, now I'm at that time I'm thinking 33 is not young, I mean I was 22 when I got hired as a CFO, right? And so I don't think that, but I'm aware other people think that's a young age, and now in hindsight I'm like, that was pretty young, and the irony there was the Kirshner family has had a control interest. They were majority shareholders in the company, and so Dewey had recommended me. John Stout, who of course you guys know really well, who I also consider a wonderful, wise mentor of mine. Dewey and John kind of started the interview process with me, but then I came down one weekend and interviewed with Dave Kirshner, who was the chairman, and at that time his father Henry Kirshner was still living, and so I met with both of them, for an interview, and I thought this is a little ironic. Like, I'm 33 years old, and I think at the time Henry was probably 92 plus or minus a little bit. I thought this is really an interesting extreme here, and so I was kind of ready for the question, right? Like, how are you going to run this company? at that tender age. And, you don't have a great answer for that, but my answer, which was the truth, is I don't expect other people to make age an issue. I'm not going to make age an issue. We're just going to get to work.
Right.
We're going to go into a room. We're going to talk about what we need to talk about. We're going to deal with the issues that need to be dealt with. And I'll either have knowledge and skills or I won't, but I'm just going to be who I am and let the chips fall where they may. I mean, that's it. I mean, all you can do is be yourself, right? I can't pretend that I'm a different age. But to your, to an element of your question there, what was that like? I'll be honest, of course, in the end, you just get comfortable in your own skin and everything's fine. In the early days, there was times I was walking around the halls like, am I really running this place? I mean, this is a little weird, And I was probably aware of that when I've got people that are old enough to be my, parents or grandparents that are reporting to me, and things like that. But, again, my approach was just be real, be who you are, lead with whatever knowledge you do or don't have, do your best, and don't overthink it too much.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's imposter syndrome, I think, is definitely a real thing. I mean, I've run into that before, and I can't imagine at 33, I don't know, that'd be it's epic level of imposter syndrome for me.
It's funny because, on the one hand, one of my big beliefs is, I'm really into just being real, be authentic, don't try to be something you're not. On the other hand, I am totally a product of fake it till you make it.
Right.
It wasn't like in a fake way, but it was also like, I don't know that I don't know this. And honestly, I had some folks ask me the other day, like, what's the thing that you know now that you'd like to tell, the younger version of you? And as I thought about that, I thought, actually, I think maybe that's a bad thing. Because you're better sometimes to be naive and not know those things. Because I'm thinking, if I knew all of that, maybe I would be too scared to jump in the deep end or to try things. And so it's almost like I was really young at the time and didn't know what I was doing.
Right.
I had to learn as I went and adjust quickly. Well, I don't want to tell that 22 or 33-year-old version of me that, because you wouldn't do the same thing.
Yeah, you don't want to tell them anything beyond just go for it.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
I like that. That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. So throughout your time at Town & Country, we worked together for around 10 years. I think you were always kind of known as a creative, visionary type person, always wanting to try the different, the new. So what are some things along the time that you were at Town & Country that you felt like were maybe some great ideas that you had or implemented, or maybe even some terrible ideas?
Right. There was plenty of both of them, wasn't there? Yeah, it's funny. I don't, if people, ask me, it's like I struggle to say, I'm a visionary. It sounds a little self-aggrandizing, but that is where my skill set is. I'm a thinker, I'm a brainstormer, I like new ideas. I kind of get bored with same old. Right. I don't really like the day-to-day. I like the new, and trying to really see the world and have a perception of where it's all going, and then figuring out how to position a company for that. I just, I'm not the type of banker that thinks, oh heck, just take deposits, make loans, do what everybody does, because I'm looking at the world and I'm seeing that, the way that people consume financial services and what they need, it's changing so rapidly, and we all know that. We all talk too much about change, but it's real. And so I just constantly was trying to figure out how can we position this company to be successful, but also in the context of the resources we have. And let's be honest, companies sometimes have limitations. I mean, we didn't have endless capital. We didn't have endless resources to do every crazy idea. But and then in the early days, of course, I came kind of with a little different idea. When I came in 2007, it was going to be more about kind of strategic positioning of the company, maybe even looking at acquisitions. And then the Great Recession hit shortly thereafter, and so the whole world changed, and all of a sudden it was a little less strategic and more about, hey, every bank has got to get through this Great Recession as unscathed as possible. Now, luckily, Town & Country was always safe and sound, but we had a few challenging episodes in there, not nearly as much as the average bank, but it was really about day to day, really keep your nose to the grindstone and keep the bank safe and sound. And so then, when we came out of that, it was probably, towards the end of 2009, 10, when then we kind of started getting back to, all right, let's think about, how we position ourselves and what is our strategy. And so we did a lot of things in terms of, branding and trying to kind of reposition both our internal culture and our external brand and how people saw us. And mostly, I'm a positive guy, so I'm going to mostly reflect on that. In the end, it all worked. Right. Certainly there was a lot of things along the way that didn't work, and I'll make it more about me. I think the things that didn't work, quite frankly, were when I wasn't in those earlier years. I wasn't as clear about, if you're a visionary, be a visionary, but that probably means you're not very good at implementation. And that was maybe where we struggled a little bit, was we had great ideas and great vision and things like that. And we did good, but we probably could have implemented better, right? We could have made it more tangible. Yeah. We could have put better process in place or whatever. And so it took a lot of years before I finally gave myself permission to say, it's okay to admit you're not really as good at that side of it as you are at this side of it. So just do that, right? But in the end, the company grew, very nicely, with no outside capital. Everything was self-funded. As we made profit. Some people don't like to talk about profit, but I'm proud of profit. Profit is what lifts people's standard of living up, and that's why this country has done so well. Is because we are, a capitalist society, and profit's not a bad thing; it's a good thing. And in our case, over 90% of the profit that Town and Country made every year stayed in the company. It stayed in the company, and so that's how we were able to fund our growth, was because as we made more profit, we retained it. We never issued a dollar of new capital the whole time I was there. And when I started, when you take out the noise, the company was making a profit of about $1 million a year when you take noise out of the numbers. Right. And in the end, when you take noise out, we made about $12 million a year. Wow. So, going from $1 million a year to $12 million a year, and all throughout that, but retaining that profit is what again funded our growth. We were about $350 million in assets when I took over. We were over $900 million in assets in the end. That's not the best growth story ever in terms of a bank, but in terms of self-funding, it's pretty good, right?
Organic.
And that was, and it was great. It was a mix of more organic, and then to some extent acquisitions. We did do 3 acquisitions during that time. And so that helped. But when you really peel back the numbers, with everybody knows when you do an acquisition, you grow, and then there's a little bit of attrition with that, because change creates controversy, and some customers opt out of that. And you hate to lose any, but you also understand that's part of the deal, right? And so we mostly, I think at one time I actually calculated it was 65% organic growth, and maybe 35% or so was from acquisitions. And so I'm very proud of that. In the last really 7 years, our performance was, we were always good and safe and sound, but the last 7 years, we had really kind of achieved more of a high performing status. And that's one of the things that, and we can talk certainly more about the merger with Heartland too, but that's one of the things that really made sense is in downstate Illinois, Town and Country Bank and Heartland Bank are 2 of the highest performing banks in downstate Illinois. So, you're putting 2 high performing banks together. We weren't identical in terms of how we did things, but you've obviously got that kind of discipline of running a good bank and paying attention to the things you need to pay attention to, and in different ways, but also being progressive, being innovative, looking for the future. So that worked well. But in the last several years, I'm particularly proud of that. We started to get very focused on what we were doing. And so I think one of the things that's a challenge for a lot of community banks is the all things to all people idea that, hey, we're in the community, we're regulated, we've got to serve everybody, we've got to do everything. And that's great. And I kind of get that, and it's warm and fuzzy, and it's apple pie and motherhood, right? Yeah. But it's not a great business strategy, because if you're not focused, it's hard to get good at things. And so, as you guys know, we did everything as far as what a typical community bank does, but we got very focused. Commercial banking, mortgage lending. Obviously, we had a mortgage banking subsidiary that was very successful, both in terms of our own retail origination, but then we also had a wholesale program where other banks provided mortgage services through our platform, because we had a platform that was built for a shop much more large than ours. But really, commercial banking was the bread and butter. Obviously, you guys know all about that, and we just had wonderful relationships, wonderful bankers. One of the things that I loved about our culture, and certainly you two are included in that, was we just had really good professional people. It wasn't, everyone's got different cultures. They like different kinds of people. I never liked, I like high performers, but I don't like hot shots, if that makes sense. It's like,
Sure.
having some humbleness and really being customer oriented, wanting to understand the customer story, knowing that, hey, if we're smart and we listen, we're going to find creative solutions for customers, and just having really good, professional, smart bankers. As you know, we don't micromanage how you do a relationship and how you manage it. It's you need good people to do that. I couldn't do it. I can't manage your relationships. We've got to have great, smart people like you guys to do that. So very proud of that. As you know, we put in a management system in the last 5 or 6 years. That was, for me, revolutionary. It had mixed reactions at certain levels in the company, but for me it was huge, because all the things that leaders deal with, trying to get people on the same page, and how do you communicate, and how do you try to get everyone rowing the boat in the same direction. Everyone tries to do that, but if you don't have a common set of tools or principles that you follow, it's just everyone figuring it out on their own to some extent, and you're trying to corral the company as much as you can. So for me, that was huge. And as far as a lot of our financial success, the number one factor that led to that, because all of a sudden we went from having leaders that were all kind of a little bit doing their own thing to all of a sudden we were extremely focused on the goals that we had, and we accomplished them. Year in and year out, we accomplished our goals because you're focused and you do what you need to.
Yeah.
That was a long answer to your question.
So something that you touched on, I think, is something that's kind of behind the curtain for most people, including, I would say, even bank employees. Everybody knows bring in deposits and lend it out to the community, right? It's kind of a circular community effort, right, to grow the community. We lend grandma's money to a small business, right? But like the M&A part of it, the mergers and acquisitions, how does that come to fruition? How are you guys? Are you just calling up CEOs and saying, "Hey, you want to sell that bank or what?" Was it interesting to you? Any big funny stories or anything from there?
There's gotta be one crazy story.
Let's see.
Well, somebody asked you a question.
There's all kinds of crazy stories, and actually, it probably not for every bank, but certainly in my case, those conversations happen far more than people really want to admit they do, because. It's kind of like, it's the corporate equivalent with dating, maybe speed dating, right? Like everybody's looking for a date, right? Yeah. And I think, from the business perspective, maybe it's a little bit oversaid, but I don't think so. This is a scale business now. You need scale, you need the resources to be able to keep up with, technology and innovation. And, we think about it just in the terms of the United States, but you look at other countries, even like China. China's much farther along than the United States in terms of digital, currency and digital banking and things like that. And so, the United States is a very fragmented banking market still, even though people don't love that there's been this mass consolidation of banks. We still have thousands of banks in this country. Illinois has, I've lost track a little bit, somewhere between 300 and 400 banks, the second only to Texas in the number of banks. Wow. It used to have 1,300 independent banks, right? And so, but even I hate to say this, it's not going to be popular, but it's still probably too many to be able to have the scale and the resources that you really need to compete. But I had conversations all the time, had conversations with local banks here even, right? And, throughout, from the very beginning, lots and lots of conversations over the years. And of course, you always talk about the benefits of scale and, how would the numbers work and things like that. But really, it's the cultural and the people aspects of it that will make these things work or not. Right. For a bank, even in a merger, one bank's really the buyer and one bank's the seller, of course. And for a bank to be sold, a human being has to want to sell that. A human being in power or influence has to want to sell that bank. And then you have to see if you can get all the human stuff out of the way. Like, well, wait a minute, we got two CEOs here, and who's going to run the place? And there's all that stuff that all gets talked about in a non-linear way during that. So, our first acquisition was actually a branch office in Quincy. That one happened to come through, that was a branch sale of a much larger institution. And so they were just kind of, rationalizing their branch network. And so it happened to be some investment bankers that I had met met up in DeKalb, I don't know, 10 years, 15 years before that,
that's cool.
that reached out to me. And so then that was really our first acquisition, and was pivotal, I think, for us in terms of just taking that first step to say, hey, we're not just the same town and country. Like, we're going to do these things. We're going to innovate. We're going to try new things. We're going to push ourselves. We can do this successfully. And then actually we had 2 acquisitions in 2016, a whole bank and another branch office. And so that was a challenge to do that. I guess probably the funniest story was, so we acquired a branch in Fairview Heights from a bank called Centru, which has ended up being an extremely successful opportunity for us, and because of the people. I mean, it's because we have really, we do, right? We have great people there, right? Yeah. And it's just been, I'm very proud of that. It's been a very successful part of our history. But the bank that was selling that branch, the CEO was a friend of mine, and actually had also worked for Dewey. I mean, just these small world things are just really interesting. And so he and I talked, and their bank had actually had some challenges, and he was the CFO named CEO to kind of help the bank fix their challenges. Mm-hmm. And I said, hey, you guys need to kind of rationalize some of your bank as you're moving your company, kind of out of a troubled situation. Our company wants to continue to grow. They were in Northern Illinois and Southern Illinois, St. Louis. And so I had this idea, and I said, hey, why don't you guys sell us your Southern Illinois, maybe St. Louis operations, but over time? We'll participate loans so that it's like a soft landing for you. Because they needed the earning assets, but they also needed to kind of rationalize themselves. And I said, I got the perfect solution, right? Yeah. So it would let us grow gradually. We'd buy the portfolio, participate some back to them. We'd grow as that
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Amortized, and then they could move on to their other things. But both sides, it wouldn't stress our capital. It wouldn't hurt their earnings. Great idea, right? Yeah. No, that didn't work. So, but eventually the CEO called and he says, "Okay, Micah, we actually are going to sell, some of these branches. So I'm gonna have an investment banker reach out to you. We are going to go through a bid process. I'm sorry, I know we've talked about it directly, but we're going to go through a bid process." I'm like, yeah, that's fine. I'll wait to hear from the investment banker. I never hear. So a few months later, he calls me back. And I'm like, hey, what the heck? I never heard from him. He goes, well, he got caught up in some stuff, but hey, we're ready to do it now. You're going to hear from an investment banker. And so, same thing, I never hear, right? And so one Monday morning, my friend, the CEO of the bank, calls and he says, Micah, he goes, I owe you a real apology. The bids for those branches were due Friday. He goes, but when I told the investment banker to make sure they reached out to Town & Country Bank, they reached out to a Town & Country Bank in Missouri, not yours. And so I had to double time it, okay, we got to figure out whether this is an acquisition that we want to do. And so I had already been to I'd already driven the market, and we were actually looking at 3 locations. And I don't want to say anything terrible, but I remember I called Dave Kirshner, who was our chairman, after I had kind of driven the market. I said, well, here's the bad news. A couple of these locations, it's a really long drive to someplace you don't want to go.
Sure.
And so I told the CEO, I said, look, here's the deal. I'm interested in Fairview Heights, but I'm not interested in the other ones. Right. And so if that can work, great. If it cannot work, no hard feelings, Well, there was another bank that was interested in the other 2 locations, but not.
Wow. That worked out perfect.
Not Fairview Heights. So, and I can't really disclose terms, but let me just say this way: it worked extremely well for us in terms of how that got valued and how that got split out.
Wow.
And so, that's just one kind of interesting story of how you meet these people and all these connections, and one conversation leads to the next. And so it's not always just this, linear process of how M&A happens. And similar with when we acquired Premier Bank of Jacksonville. That was actually a consultant that both banks had that he kind of had the idea that, hey, maybe this would be a good deal. And as you know, Todd Green's family had a significant ownership interest in that bank. And so Todd and I met, I don't remember how long. It was well over a year, maybe 2 years that we had conversations before we finally got around to a deal there. So these things are really just very nonlinear, and everyone has its own story. But I love it. I loved that chase. I wish we could have done more of that, but again, everything we did was self-funded. It was all cash acquisitions. We didn't raise capital. We didn't issue stock as part of that. So I couldn't chase it as fast as maybe I would have liked to if I'd have had that capital checkbook, right?
Right.
But nevertheless, it was good for us, and all the acquisitions worked out well for us, and so very proud of that part as well.
I always imagined that at any of those CEO summits where all the banks CEOs get together, that they're just, talking about this stuff all the time. Who's buying, who's selling.
Absolutely. It's a huge topic in every conference, but there's actually one conference in Arizona each year.
I've heard of this.
Yes, and it's called the Acquire or Be Acquired Conference, AOBA.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
And really, that's a big conference that people that are in that game, they go to that. And it's just a good conference otherwise. Right. But it's loaded with all these investment bankers. They're going to buy you cocktails and dinners and stuff like this. And they have it, in a couple different hotels they have it up. But there's all these side rooms and there's all these side meetings going on. Everybody's talking deals down there.
That's exactly what I thought
It's exactly what you think. And the funny thing is, if you're a banker sitting in the sessions, you're probably not doing deals because all the bankers that are doing deals are skipping the sessions because they're having side meetings or whatever. And certainly, I think, when we were looking, we were obviously looking at different options for ourselves, and over many years, the board and I had talked about, hey, we got to scale, we got to do the right thing for the company, for the shareholders. Should we buy? Should we sell? Should we merge? All these things. And I think I left one of those conferences, and I came back and I wrote a memo to Dave and the board. I think there were 7 different options and conversations. Hey, this thing might have some legs. Cool. This was cool, but I don't like it, And so it's just that kind of stuff was constantly going on. And I'm sure you guys probably knew that in the bank, but those are the things that when you're like, what the heck's Micah working on? What's he doing? Like, those are the types of things that are always going on, as you say, kind of behind the scenes.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense.
So was there some big crazy idea that you really wanted to do that either wasn't possible or
like a branch in
couldn't
Seattle?
Get it to, It was some big dream that you.
Actually, Henry Kirshner was probably the one sometimes that had the big crazy ideas. He really wanted the bank to open an office in Florida.
Seems to be a
2008.
But maybe at the wrong time. But it all worked out. No, I think I had a ton of crazy ideas, I guess, but I'm this kind of brainstorming guy, but then I'm also the CPA, so it's like at the end of the day, I'm not reckless. I'm not going to do reckless things. But I think my big thing, just this is more kind of from a finance perspective, and we were starting to work on this. This is a little wonky, but kind of the de-balance sheeting of the industry. I mean, banks are very focused on their balance sheet. Mm-hmm. Take deposits from grandma, we loan money to the small business, whatever. And, they're just going to constantly be more disintermediation. So it was really trying to position the bank to make the balance sheet less relevant. Every bank, when you say, oh, hey, tell me about your bank, they want to talk about their asset size, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, in our case, we were also focused on revenue, more so than a lot of banks. You ask what their revenue is, the CEO may not even know the number. They don't quite think the same way that other businesses do. Well, we also grew our revenue from $13 million to almost $50 million, well into the $40 millions in that same time frame too. Mm-hmm. That's pretty significant revenue lift, right? Yeah. And so I was trying to position us to be more nimble like other businesses where it's not so much about the balance sheet, because that's what limits a bank's growth. Mm-hmm. You have to have capital to support the assets and you have to have deposits to make the loans. Mm-hmm. But what if you have a business model that's not as a first party to that, but as a facilitator or whatever, then you can grow as quickly as what you are strategically able to do that. And I still think that that's where it's going. And so banks talk about, we need more, fee income or non-interest income sources, which is the simple view of that. But the bigger view of that is, how do you legitimately have a different business model where you're still fulfilling the financial needs of whoever your constituency is, but maybe doing it in different ways where you're not limited to your growth and how quickly you can scale. But so those are kind of the crazy ideas, and we nibbled with that. Obviously, our mortgage business, that's an off-balance sheet business, but it's also why we got into some of the other things we did, like the SBA program, and even like doing some of the affordable housing and some of the other kind of niche things that we had done over the years. It was all about seeing what will work and then trying to position ourselves where we can remove kind of the limits to growth.
Mm-hmm. Did we ever look at buying any sort of outside companies, accounting firms, anything? I mean, we had a share of a title company, obviously, which is a common practice for banks. But was there any?
Yep. Yeah, we looked at insurance agencies. We looked at even kind of some joint ventures along those lines. I'm trying to remember. I mean, there was looked at some specialty finance businesses. There's a lot of things we looked at. We obviously didn't bite, and so those made sense. I mean, everything you've got to just really, this is why I think having a solid strategic plan, core values, mission, being very clear about all that stuff, and not just words on a sheet of paper. Like, do you really believe it? Does this really have meaning? Not just, me. I mean, I like to have pretty brands and expressions and things like that, but I also want the business behind that to make sense. And that's the thing where you've got to have that filter, or else it's squirrel. You're just looking for the next squirrel running down the road. Yep. And so we were pretty disciplined about, does this fit with what we've said, how we're trying to position ourselves? Well, as you know, it's harder to find something like that does fit than doesn't, right? And so a lot of those types of acquisitions come with great opportunities, but they also come with their own unique challenges that could throw you off of what your positioning is. So, in the end, I think we grew. We pretty much grew as much as we could, given the limitations that we had. So, we only did 2 or 3 things of the 100 ideas that we had, but they mostly worked.
Yeah. So obviously, the last several months have been really interesting, to say the least, in banking. Some bank failures. Some other banks that have been called out for being on the edge, and maybe some big injections to help those banks out. What do you see happening in the banking world in the near future, and maybe even a little further out, United States-wise, and maybe even like local community?
He's asking if we should look for other jobs.
I think you guys are going to be fine. I will tell you, though, it's been funny, in retirement, I've been of 2 minds. One is I'm kind of relieved that I'm not having to deal with some of this right now.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie about that. On the other hand, as you know, in our Town and Country's merger with Heartland, there was stock and cash involved there. I preferred the stock. We let our shareholders kind of choose, and then we made it all work. And I wanted the stock because I really believe in the combined company. So I'm still pretty heavily concentrated in Heartland. I'm a big supporter of Heartland for a lot of reasons, but partly because I'm a shareholder. So I'm a little anxious about, the bank stocks have kind of been beat up a little bit. First of all, my perception is that, a lot of this is where perception becomes reality, and it's almost more a crisis of confidence. So when you look at, even some of the banks that failed, if you looked at their 12/31 financial statements from last year, you would not see that this is a bank that's going to fail.
Right.
Profitable, well capitalized. I mean, Silicon Valley Bank had a low loan-to-deposit ratio. The problem was, and this is, again, getting into the details of banking, they had a reasonably long duration bond portfolio, safe bonds. They were going to get all their money back from those bonds, but the market value of them changes as interest rates change, right? Sure. So with this huge spike in interest rates, they had a devaluation of their bond portfolio. Had people not panicked about that and just stayed calm, it would have been fine, because eventually they get all their money back. It's just kind of accounting, right? But that phenomena created panic in some people, and then you guys have heard the stories. Some people are kind of saber rattling about that, and all of a sudden they had a run on the bank. That's in the end, that's why banks fail. It's a liquidity crunch. It does kind of expose the Achilles heels of banks, which is that we take $1 of capital, we add $9 of deposits and make a $10 loan, or $8 in loans, and whatever, And so if you come in and want to take all your money out of the bank, I could say, I've got the assets, Nick, but I don't really have enough cash to give you. Yep. Customers don't really like to hear that, right? And so it does kind of expose that Achilles heel a little bit, which, again, to my earlier point about, my long-term view was we need to debalance sheet the business models a little bit, because that is kind of the Achilles heel of banking, is just that reliance on that leverage, and that we need the confidence, right? Because these guys weren't having losses. They really didn't have actual fundamental financial concerns that would have been catastrophic in the long run. It was the loss of confidence and then the run on the bank, right? So I think now, and of course you can probably imagine, how I view some of these things. Unfortunately, I'm not a huge believer in our fiscal policy right now, because we're trying to control inflation. through raising interest rates, which tends to affect demand when most of this was caused by a supply problem, right? And so I'm not a huge proponent of some of the fiscal policy, and I'm actually not a huge proponent, hopefully maybe you can edit this out, of a super proactive Federal Reserve. I have more faith, quite frankly, in the markets to kind of regulate where interest rates should be. And I think sometimes when you have more of a bureaucracy regulating that, you can get significantly unintended consequences like we're seeing right now. I really see a lot of this as unintended consequences of a little bit too much bureaucracy involved in the markets, right? So having said all that, it basically comes back to what I said. I think there's going to continue to be consolidation in banking, and I think that debalance sheeting the business models is going to continue to be important. But here's the good news, and I'm always an optimist. People still buy homes. People need a place to live. Businesses need capital. You know, when you peel back, if you detach yourself from the specifics of what a bank does, and instead look at the purpose for why we're here and get customer focused, what do the customers need? There's going to be these needs, I think, for as far as the eye can see. Right. They just need to be provided in different ways. And so the banks and the bankers that are innovative and can adjust to that, they're going to be fine, because you're going to figure it out. Those that just want things to be the way they were are not, you know. So that's just kind of the way I see it.
Yeah. Those banks that end up owning the troubled banks, a lot of times come out with a really nice portfolio that they get to take over. Do you think that there's a method of getting capital into those troubled banks that the government could manage instead of just fire selling it to somebody else? And
you know, the problem is with these things, it becomes about time, and the time and this panic and loss of confidence just don't work very well together. And I will say, you know, the FDIC, they know that what you don't want to do is get this compounding impact from it. So there's a reason why they always announce these on Sunday. It's because they want it settled before the markets open, you know. And so maybe, but it's very hard to get that pulled together. And so instead what they do is they craft these deals over the weekend to just instill confidence. But there's a lot of shareholders that I'll tell you, I had some stock in one of the banks that failed. Not a huge amount, but I mean, I read an article Sunday night. I just got my stock wiped out. I had some stock in Signature Bank in New York, so I thought it was a reasonably good bank, you know, and a little bit undervalued. But so take my advice with a grain of salt, because I had some stock in that bank. But you know, I think that, you know, I'm more of a proponent of the market figuring these things out. I do think that, you know, the Fed is, one of their jobs is to be the lender of last resort. Well, you know, some of these banks did actually have the assets. You know, there's a market value issue with the bond portfolio. Right. You could argue what the Fed should have done was just lent them as much money as they needed to make up for the deposit outflow, as long as they were still solvent, could still, you know, pay their bills, and the government could get all their money back. But it's hard to do that now because that's perceived as a bailout. It's not really. It's not. You're not bailing out anybody. You're just, you know, funding the institution.
Which banks have access to those funds anyway.
Right.
That's one of their funding sources that some are considered to be more emergency funds, but, you know, there's all types of funding sources they can get a hold of.
But in these cases, when you're losing 40% of your funding in a few weeks, it's just catastrophic. You know? So, but I don't perceive there to be a banking crisis at all. There is in these limited instances. I don't want to underplay that. There's been pain out there, right? But banks are well capitalized. They're safe and sound. This significant increase in interest rates has caused the margins of some banks, because of the cost of funds. It's caused that margin to decrease. That's not, in the vast majority of cases, that is not a catastrophic blow. That means, our margin's down a little bit. We may have a little bit less revenue next year. We may have a little bit less profit next year than we had this year. But it's not like loan losses and people are defaulting on loans and we're losing massive portions of our assets or capital. So my biggest, and my wife keeps telling me, you need to get out there and talk about this more. My biggest thing is, everybody calm down. Like, everybody just calm down, because we don't really have a crisis here. These are well-run institutions. They know how to balance these balance sheets. Yes, is there episodes of mismanagement? Of course there are, because we're all human, right? But everybody needs to realize we don't have a crisis here. We just have a lot of this is all, by the way, the ripple effects of COVID. It's all the ripple effects of COVID, shutting down the economy, supply issues, interest rates now reacting to inflation. It's this up and down, but those waves are going to start to streamline a little bit as we get further and further away. The economy will work, things will kind of level out, and everybody just has to be calm and let that happen.
And by that time, all the CFOs will just be AI bots. So.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Will be set. So
you guys are going to have to
take the human out of it.
Yeah, you guys are going to have to explain that to me. I mean, I get it, but that's an interesting topic.
I don't think I can.
AI.
Yeah, this is AI guy over
He
here.
writes all my credit memos.
do you find your approval rates a lot higher with the
Yeah,
AI?
they're like, wow, this guy is smart. He knows a lot about this industry.
He keeps talking about his loan assistant that he has, but he's never told us the name, and I think I just figured it
Rosie.
out.
Do I need to go back? Did you program? Hey, what are the buzzword Micah likes to hear? And if that's in the credit memo, okay.
Yeah. That's good.
So aside from wearing sandals more often, what's next for you?
Yeah, I'm pretty much retired right now, but at 49 I'm not done, and so I love. My two passions were always, people and finance. And it's an odd combination. You don't usually put those two together, which is why, community banking was wonderful for me. I mean, that's what it is. It's people
I'd
and
say
finance.
We're both in that boat too.
Right, it's awesome. And so, so I'm going to be working, I'm doing a little bit of work with my stepson. He's actually got a turnaround firm. And we've got some ideas of some different things that we want to do there.
Awesome.
We're different. I'm the banker and kind of the intellectual. And he's really bright, got a lot of grit. He can go into kind of distress situations and help companies. But in the long run, I'm looking to kind of put a group together and work with a team and do some direct investing and a little bit in the private equity space. I love business. I love the idea of owning businesses, of improving businesses, but more from that kind of strategic business, but also like strategic financial perspective, more so than like day-to-day operations. So I'm not really as interested in day-to-day operations as I am, strategically positioning, doing some direct investing, and things like that. And I may do a little bit of consulting and kind of strategic advising to some. I have mixed feelings about that. I think consultants are awesome, but sometimes consultants can come with a bad name too, which is telling people what they already know, kind of a thing. So I don't know if I'll do much of that, but I'll probably dabble a little bit there. So it's going to be a blend of kind of doing what I want to do from that perspective, and quite frankly, traveling more and spending more time with family as well. Town and country reasonably. In the world of community banking, we were kind of a medium-sized community bank. In the world of banking overall, we were tiny, right? But it's still, when you're in that position, it's all consuming, and you're thinking about everything and worrying about everything. And I loved every minute. I love most minutes of it. But I'm looking to kind of have a different phase here where I'm going to do some more things independently, but then also have some time to pursue other interests.
And wear sandals more.
And wear sandals. I might become a permanent Birkenstock guy.
There you go.
Yeah.
I wore them today because I knew your camera wouldn't be able to see my feet.
Yeah. Well, you kind of pioneered the no tie thing, and banking has.
For that.
Yes, right.
Banking has gotten a lot more casual. I think CEOs, business people in general are much more casual. You see a lot more polos, and you're actually starting to see more jeans and polos, and the stuffy suit is kind of it's appropriate at times, but it's not necessarily a day-to-day thing.
Yeah, and my real perspective there, again, for me, everything comes back to be real. Be yourself. Don't be fake. Don't be phony. Don't try to act like you're better than other people. We're all just doing our thing. Everybody's just trying to have a relationship and do things. And so, my real view was be yourself and be appropriate for whoever you're doing business with. But I think there's everybody's got different views about that. It's fine. Nobody's right, nobody's wrong on that issue. Should we be casual? Should we be formal? But my thing is, let's just be real. Let's be ourselves and don't be intimidating. I never liked the aspect of banking that somebody's got to come in and sit across the desk and beg for somebody to make a decision about them. It's like, no, it's a relationship. It's two-way. We're honored to have people do business with us, and it's two ways. So that's the feeling I wanted.
Yeah, I'm going to try to see if I can get Steve to let me wear shorts.
Don't do that. We don't need that in the office.
He's a little more old school, you know. Yeah. But he likes not having the tie, too.
He has a sweater collection like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah. Ask him sometime.
The Cosby Show.
Ask him sometime about what his wife and daughters did one time in his closet, though, because they'd had enough of some of the out of style sweaters. So.
That's funny. Yeah, they keep him updated, even his office decorations and everything. They just come in every once in a while and refresh it for him. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, what else? Is there anything else that you want to talk about? Or
no, I'd probably rather sit and ask how you guys are doing. But
I do want to tell my one Micah story that I kind of, we had some stories, but kind of reflect back on when I was a branch manager at our Dirksen location. I think you probably remember this. We had a meeting, and for some reason, I don't know why we ever did this. I don't know if it's a common banking practice or not. We had profit and loss and balance sheets for each of our branches. And I thought that was kind of unique. And we were going through them, and I was like, this branch is losing money. Like, we didn't have commercial loans or anything like that. Obviously, the bank wasn't losing money, but, as far as the small retail loan portfolio was down, we had a lot of expenses. Running a branch is not, essentially I was paying my own electric bill. I wasn't writing a check, but it was like going into these financials, and I'm like, this is very expensive, and we're not generating a lot of revenue just with what's going on right here. And I remember you on a legal pad, just John, if you do this, I think over the next couple of years you could be profitable. And I'm like, wow, I can make this branch profitable. And you were like, within reason, we want you to be the CEO of this branch. This is your branch.
Own your baby, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so that was empowering to me. I was like, I have the ability to do this. Now, I didn't do anything wild or anything, but I certainly looked at those items and said, yeah, we need to make more loans, and we need to make profitable loans, and we need to not lose money. And staffing, you got to have X amount of staff just to run a branch. But, I think we did a cool job, and I shared those with
I was just going to say, it's funny you say that, because, that was... He did the same thing with me when I was a teller working for him at that branch, and that was one of the first times where you piqued my curiosity by doing that, and I was like, you know what? I probably have a lot to learn, and here I am, 8 years later, still just trying to learn as much as I can.
No, it's great, and I love that you bring it up because, of course, first of all, in bank, it's all about where you attribute the revenue and who gets credit for different things you do, right? But I loved that, and quite frankly, I loved that you asked, because that was a point of difference, right? Most people weren't. They were trying to figure out, hey, how do I get the branch open on time? How do I deal with the teller that didn't show up for work today? I got a customer that's screaming. And that's all important, and you got to deal with that too. But having that business sense, and that's where I wanted people to feel like, yeah, you run this thing. Like, I'm not going to run this thing for you. You can do it. So I love that you asked, and quite frankly, one of the things I love to do is do that. Take the sheet of paper out. I'd like to. I like to share. I like to, whatever knowledge I do have, I want to lay it out. But I also want to know what you think and how does all this work, right? So that's a big passion of mine, and that's why also like where my interest is with kind of this idea of kind of some direct investing and ownership. Again, I don't really want to run the thing. I just like working with people and sharing what I can know, and hey, let's put two smart heads together. So no, I loved it, and it told me many years ago, hey, John's somebody who cares. He wants to be successful. He wants to do more than just show up and collect a paycheck. And that stuff, whether I say it or not, that stuff, you're always looking for that. CEOs are always looking for that. Everybody, they say, oh, I wish I could have an opportunity. Well, opportunities are sometimes taken. You got to raise your hand. You got to be seen. Sometimes you got to do something before it's even in your job to be seen that way. And that was a good example of where I saw that in you. And I think it's worked out for you too, right? I mean, it really helped, I think, for you to kind of move forward in your career. So
yeah, I've grown a lot working for Town & Country. I appreciate all the opportunities I've had. So
you want me to tell my Micah story now?
Yeah, tell your Micah.
Tell my Micah story.
Is this where we end with the roast at the end?
No, this is good. So as you know, this is my second time around with Town & Country, now Heartland. So the first time...
Although I think the first time you used John more in your emails, right?
I think the bank just put John on everything, but yeah.
You're always Nick to us.
Yeah, exactly. So the first 2 years, while I was going to Lincoln Land, was working there, and just a place to do homework, and then decided I was going to move to Champaign and go work for a bank over there. Not because I didn't like what I was doing. It was just I had originally planned to go to school over there, and was moving out that way anyway. So Town and Country didn't have a branch there, so I was really nervous to leave because I had such a good experience for those first 2 years. So my last day was two other people's last day as well, and one of them was a good friend of mine, Tom Johnson.
Right.
You probably remember Tom, and then our marketing person, Stephanie, was her last day. And I don't remember who set this up, but there was a going away party set up for Stephanie, not for Tom and I, because we had kind of kept it secret, not secret, but we didn't want to leave, so we weren't really trying to make a big deal out of it. We weren't there long enough to earn a going away party either. But anyways, long story short, we went to Brick House. And we were all sitting around the table, and it was a big going away party for Stephanie. And at some point, somebody was like, "Well, isn't it? It's Nick and Tom's last day too." And you slapped your hands on the table and said, "What the hell?" And it was one of those moments where I was like, Micah's a real guy. This is cool. He actually gives a crap that we're leaving, even though I was I had been there only 2 years.
I'd probably forgotten that, but as you said that, I remember that well, and I actually was kind of like, damn it, I don't want to hear this. This is bad news,
Yeah, it was just funny, and that stuck with me, that you cared about somebody or people that were at entry level positions that it's not super common in our world. So,
or even that they know those people.
Right.
That was what I've always loved about being in a community bank, because I've worked for some big banks that literally, my story is, they give you a number, and when you need help, you call a 1-800 number, and they're like, "What's your number?" And you give them. You're just a number, you know what I mean? Yeah. And I always loved being able to walk into your office and ask a question or email or whatever, and it was like, that's awesome to work for a company.
Well, one of my favorite things was, we would do, onboarding, new employee orientation. I love going in and talking to the new people. It didn't matter whether you were a senior vice president or whatever, entry level. I just wanted to hear people's stories and know what makes them tick. And, some of the most interesting things come out of that. And it also always helped me understand, because part of what I like to talk about was how people saw kind of banking and finance at whatever stage and age they were. And it really helped inform me about what's going on with people. But, also having been there myself, I know what's going on in people's heads. Everybody's trying to figure out what they want to do with their life, how they're going to move forward. And I just love the engagement. And I don't, as you guys know, I never really took myself too seriously. So I loved all those relationships.
Yeah. It's awesome.
Well, I think we could talk all day.
Absolutely.
You have to break it into 2 episodes if we don't shut up eventually, right?
Love it, yeah. So we really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much.
I was very happy that you even took my text message.
Oh my God. No, I was honored. I was like, man, these guys still want to talk to me. This is awesome. I'm super happy to be here, and I'm super proud of you guys, and I'm just honored that to be here with you, and I'm glad that you're with the company. I'm again, as I said, a huge supporter, and I think you guys are really, you've already done great things, and you've got a lot more to do, and I think this is one of them, and so congratulations.
Yeah, I only got 4 years to become CEO, to stay on the Micah path.
Do it!
I'm already way behind. I don't know what's going on. Anyway. All right, well, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Micah.
Great.
The Vault.